welcome you to today's talk, Gadamerian Hermeneutics and Confucian Interpretation, a pedagogical exploration of teaching, delivered by the wonderful Dr. Ying Ma. First, I would like to acknowledge that I am an uninvited guest on the unceded and unsurrendered land of the Hochmillen-speaking peoples. I raise my hands in deep appreciation to them for providing me with a place to live, learn, and teach. I'm pleased to welcome Dr. Ying Ma, who is an instructor in the Department of Educational Studies. She always had a great passion for teaching. Prior to her master's and PhD studies in Canada, she had been a high school teacher in Beijing, China for 7 years. Having obtained her PhD degree in the Department of Curriculum and Pedagogy at UBC in 2019, she returned to the classrooms and has taught in post-secondary institutions in both Canada and China. She's the author of her new book, The Ethics of Becoming a Good Teacher, in conversation with Aristotle and Confucius. Under Routledge, Ying has found opportunities to contribute to the educational dialogue through teaching and research. In recent years, she published more than 10 articles in important educational journals and book chapters on topics of ethics, curriculum theory, pedagogy, equity, equality, Western and Eastern wisdom traditions. Beyond publications, Ying takes on roles that contribute to the academic community. Currently serving as the program chair for the Canadian Philosophy of Education Society, she's also honored to contribute to Curriculum Studies in Canada project as a postdoctoral fellow from 2020, and has served as the editor and reviewer for more than 100 research briefs. Her work aims to humbly contribute to the ongoing conversation surrounding education with a focus not only without Canada, but extending to the broader international community. Join me in welcoming Ying, and I'm going to give the floor to Ying now. Please, we look forward to your questions after the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Zaya, for your very kind introduction, and thank you all for coming. So I will share my screen and start my presentation. So can you see my screen now? All right? Good? Okay, great. So great. So before I start, I hope to acknowledge and thank the first peoples of Hokkien language group on whose traditional and city territories that I live and speak from today. And the topic of my presentation is Gadamerian Hermeneutics and Confucian Interpretation, a pedagogical exploration of teaching. So first of all, I hope to give you an overview of my talk today. So I will start with an introduction, like reading a poem for you. And then I will introduce Gadamerian and Confucius and two thinkers and who can inform my research. And especially I hope to bring their insights to teaching. Like I'm not going to talk about Gadamerian and Confucian thoughts, but I'm going to bring their thoughts to shed some light to today's teaching in pedagogically. And I will conclude with some possible understandings. So first of all, I will read you a poem. So this is a poem from Su Shi. Su Shi is in Song Dynasty. And so this poem talks about his appreciation of Mount Lu. So I will read it for you. So when you look at it from the front, it is a peak. When you look at it sideways, it is a mountain range. The true Mount Lu is lost to my sight, for it is right in this mountain that I reside. So this little poem is very well-known poem in China, but I think this poem shows us a very important insights in terms of understanding. So as we can see, the peak viewed from the front represents a simplified and singular understanding. It symbolizes the simplicity that comes from a direct and unexamined viewpoint. So when viewed sideways, Mount Lu transforms into a mountain range, highlighting the diverse dimensions and complexities that can be overlooked and from the frontal perspective. So the poet's acknowledgement of losing sight of the true Mount Lu can be interpreted as a reminder that complete understanding may be elusive. So the notion of residing within the mountain suggests a more immersive and personal understanding. So Su Shi's poem encourages to approach understanding as a dynamic process that involves exploring various perspectives, acknowledging the limitations of our perception, and recognizing the value of personal experience in gaining deeper and more meaningful comprehension of the world around us. So it speaks to the complexity of understanding and invites us to embrace a more comprehensive and open-minded approach to knowledge. So in light of Su Shi's poem, I hope to say that pursuing better understandings has always been an assiduous human endeavor, not only in the realm of philosophy, but also in our daily life and in our teaching. So when teachers teach, we aspire to help our students understand better, maybe understand better about the subject matter, understand better about the world, and understand better about themselves. So what indeed does it mean to understand better? What are the pedagogical approaches towards better understanding? So in this presentation, I will focus on Gadamerian Hermeneutics and Confucian ways of interpretation and primarily investigate their approaches to understanding. So I'm aware that traditions of Gadamerian Hermeneutics and Confucian interpretation are rooted in very distinct cultural and social and historical traditions. Yet their distinctive but associated approach to understanding would help us initiate dialogues between them and provide teachers insights into teaching. So following Burston, I believe different wisdom traditions might not be compatible or commensurable, yet they are comparable. So I will compare and contrast Gadamerian hermeneutics and Confucian way of interpretation with a focus on understanding and discuss about in what ways their related approaches to understanding might inform us pedagogically. So first of all, I will talk about these two thinkers, about Gadamerian hermeneutics. So first of all, maybe I will talk a little bit background about hermeneutics. So hermeneutics actually is etymologically related to Hermes, which could be understood as cunning and occasionally violent, a trickster or robber. So Hermes plays a mediating role in the form of language between the mortal and the godly. Hermeneutic understanding inevitably involves the risks of changing, deviating, transforming, adding to, or losing some original meanings of godly words in order to be comprehensible to the finite human world. So yet the impossibility of fully recovering the original meaning of the godly word in Hermes' translation allows for the very space for the newness in understanding. So Gadamer, the German philosopher, he is embedded in the continental tradition. He's best known for his 1960 book, Truth and Method. So according to Gallagher, they are like a spectrum of hermeneutic tradition. So from the very conservative hermeneutics, which is based on hermeneutic tradition defined by like Schleiermacher and Dilthey in the 19th century, which aims to break away from one's own historical constraints and reach universal or at least objective truth by following well-defined hermeneutic canons. And to the more radical one, like radical hermeneutics aims to deconstruct the meaning of a text, not in order to analyze it, but to reconstruct it in a different meaning out of it. And showing every versions are contingent and relevant. And to critical hermeneutics more focused on social and individual emancipation from the political power and economic exploitation. But now the person that I will focus today, Gadamerian Hermeneutics, is somewhere in between. So between the very conservative hermeneutics and critical and radical hermeneutics. So his hermeneutics is understood as a moderate or philosophical hermeneutics. And the moderate hermeneutics, which is Gadamerian Hermeneutics, he's a representative figure of that tradition, and he actually acknowledges the inevitable prejudices and strives towards a better understanding in the to and fro movement. So I believe that Gadamerian hermeneutics really focus on understanding better. And this is a very distinguishing characteristic of Gadamerian hermeneutic tradition, considering all the very wide spectrum of the hermeneutic tradition. So that's why I believe that his ideas about understanding will really shed a lot of light on today's topic. And secondly, I will introduce another important thinker today, who is Confucius. So I know hermeneutic tradition, is embedded in Western cultures. So I prefer to use the term Confucian interpretation or 儒家诠释. So instead of Confucian hermeneutics in my investigation, so I choose the English translation interpretation, which encompasses broader connotations to contrast rather than subsume or synthesize Confucian approaches to hermeneutic traditions embedded predominantly in Western discourses. So Confucius, a few words about Confucius. He is a very famous Chinese thinker, and he was born in 551 BC, and his influence especially upon East Asian intellectual traditions is immeasurable. So I will speak to it in more details later. But now I hope to emphasize that I recognize that the historical path of Confucianism could be depicted as a history of constant interpretation of classics. So instead of elaborating the interpretation itself as a methodology or approach, so the genealogy of Confucianism, so it's a long history, as you know, more than 2,000 years. So it's from pre-Qin classic Confucianism to New Confucianism and to contemporary Confucianism. So embodies its interpretive thoughts and ideas. So in the foundational era of Confucianism, Confucius edits, revises, organizes, delivers the 6 classics. So borrowing Lin Nanwu's description, Confucius deletes the book of poems, edits the book of ritus and music, praises the book of change, revises spring and autumn annals to enable a better understanding. So New Confucianism is considered to be a revival of Confucianism in China. It originates in the Tang Dynasty and becomes prominent in Song and Ming dynasties. So there are 2 main branches in Song Ming, Song Ming dynasties. There are Chengzhu branch and Luwang branch. So Chengzhu branch is, is very considered as an orthodox interpretation of Confucian classics. So the scope of Confucian interpretation is, understood in a very, orthodox sense or strict sense under the dominant influence of Chengzhu branch, which advocates for a rigid understanding of Confucian texts. However, as I said, there are another branches called Luwang branch, Wang Yangming and Lu Jiuyuan. So their branch of New Confucianism emphasizes more on human subjectivity in its creative encounters with the classical text. So for New Confucian Wang Yangming, the key Confucian interpretation is to communicate with the classics with heart. It echoes with Mensch's notion of interpretation as understanding the author's text through one's own circumstances and willingness. So the contemporary Confucianism is considered to be the second revival of New Confucianism. And as you know, the New Confucian Manifesto is sought to be in line with the Luwang branch of New Confucianism in Song Ming Dynasty. So, it's a bit of a history background for Confucian interpretation tradition. So what I want to show you is that Confucianism is not only one thinker's thought. It goes through a long history. It has its own, evolvement and throughout the history, and it has its own different interpretations as well. So I hope to emphasize that it's there's a complexity of historicity of Confucianism, and what I hope to draw on is the text of Confucius and Mencius in the period of classical Confucianism, and Wang Yangming as a representative of Luwang branch of New Confucianism, and Mo Zhongshan in contemporary Confucianism. So these are the thinkers I hope to primarily draw on in terms of Confucian interpretation. So, hopefully, you get a bit of a background for Gadamerian Hermeneutics and also Confucian tradition. Both are embedded in their own philosophical traditions. So now I really want to focus my talk on the pedagogical insights. What insights they can give us in terms of teaching. So both for Gadamer and Confucius, if they can talk to today's teachers, what insights they can offer them. So as discussed above, Gadamerian hermeneutics is oriented around understanding. So for Gadamer, understanding emerged from relationships with fusion of horizons between two and several parties in conversation. So the encounter with the text and the other is an encounter with another horizon. So horizons do not necessarily merge into one. Rather, those horizons can co-create an event in which understanding in its newness emerge from the creative and dynamic space in between. And I believe the historical traces of Confucianism primarily reveal and embody the evolving Confucian ways of understanding too. So from Confucius' search for moral understanding in the classical text, to New Confucian Wang Yangming's emphasis on one's heart in understanding, and the unification of understanding and action, and to Lu Jiuyuan and his claim on through myself and understand 6 classics, while six classics help me to understand myself. So they really, have towards contemporary Confucian Mo Zhongshan's explanation of the purposes and approaches of Confucian understanding. So considering all this emphasis, Gadamerian and Confucian emphasis on understanding in different ways. So I come up with 4 different aspects for me to highlight that if they talk to today's teachers, they may ask us to pay attention to these 4 things. Firstly, understanding for both of them is closely associated with tradition. So pedagogically, we're always already historically situated and implicated. And next, Gadamerian and Confucian approaches to understanding neither have fixated procedures to follow, nor best methods to apply in scientific sense. So Gadamerian has understand its methodology as a to and fro and circular movement, and emphasize on the subjective creativity and interpretive transcendence. We can notice the interpretive transcendence in Confucian understanding. So they could help us to understand teaching in the between space, between the lived curriculum and the planned curriculum, and animating the teaching space with improvisation and attunement rather than very predetermined methodology or methods. So then understanding for Confucius and Gadamer is not to gain absolute or universal objective truth, to pursue Gadamerian finite and fallible truths with small t, and Confucian idea of embodied and moral truth. And this would inform a more inclusive and open pedagogy with an emphasis on plurality of truths and importance of ethics. And finally, I will investigate the integrative relationship between understanding and acting or application. So for both Gadamer and Confucian. For Gadamer, understanding involves application in itself. So according to New Confucian Wang Yangming, there is always a unity of understanding and action as well. So the unity of action and understanding will orient teaching toward not only knowing, but also agentic actions. So for lingering traditions, and Gadamer elaborates well on understanding is inevitably constrained and enabled by tradition. So while admitting constrained and finite horizon understanding traditions, Gadamer expresses the possible newness in encounter the traditions. So even where life changes violently, as in the age of revolution, far more of the old is preserved in the supposed transformation of everything that anyone knows. So it combines with the new to create new value. So on one hand, we understand traditions in our constrained horizons that are already mediated. But on the other hand, as understanding could be renewed and generated in encountering with the past. So Gadamer acknowledges the power of tradition and attempts to bring the tradition near so that it can speak in a new voice. So Gadamer tells understanding is to be thought of less as a subjective act than as a participating in an event of tradition, a process of transmission in which past and present are constantly mediated. So the limitations of a tradition for Gadamer could be the beginning point of understanding anew. It is never merely a making present again a past actuality, but a making present again as a gather together anew. So like Gadamer, Confucius shows great respect to traditions and upholds the importance of tradition greatly. So yet he emphasizes more on understanding and appreciating the virtues of certain historical practices compared with Gadamer's argument on the inevitable historicity of understanding. So for Confucius, there is a highlight on deliberate learning and recovery of certain practices in traditions. So, for example, Confucius roots his core thinking in the three dynasties, Xia, Shang, Zhou dynasty, which represents a normative period for Confucius. So Confucius organizes, inherits ancient Chinese traditions and creates Confucianism in continuity with the valued traditions. And Confucius once mentioned, I transmit, but do not create. I have been faithful to and love antiquity. So Confucius appears to be a traditionalist or conservatist in preserving Confucian traditional values and practices. But however, with his very deepest sympathy and reverence towards tradition, Confucius does not follow tradition blindly or rigidly. The strong connection Confucius builds to antiquity, especially in his reminiscence towards Zhou's rituals and cultures, lies in a creative tension between the present and the ancient, the self and the historical exemplars, rather than the total conformity to the traditions. So the Analects records Confucius' disapproval of the formality of Zhou's rituals. In ceremonies, we should prefer simplicity to lavishness. In funerals, prefer grief to formality. So quote unquote from Analects. So as we can see, Confucius' involvement in tradition could be understood as both as a deliberate following as well as an active and creative participation. As Li Zehou suggests, Confucius infiltrates transmission and creativity in his own understanding of traditions. So Confucius is always transmitting and is always creating at the same time. So compared with Gadamer's acknowledgement of tradition as a limiting and at the same time enabling Confucian tradition holds a more active and pragmatic view towards tradition with hope to gain wisdom from tradition and appropriate it to the new context. So, or rather, there is a sense of practicality in Confucius' recreation of tradition, making use of tradition to serve the good of his own age. So, what they can remind us about teaching. So the approaches of Gadamerian Hermeneutics and Confucian interpretation to traditions would help remind us the historical situatedness of our teaching. So we are humble that our teaching is constrained while at the same time enabled by its historical moment. Traditions often encapsulate accumulated wisdom, distilled from the experiences and knowledge of previous generations. So integrating traditional teachings in education not only ensures that this wisdom is passed down, but also to be renewed in today's context with providing valuable insights. So nowadays, teachers are often encouraged to implement new teaching models, new technologies. However, Gadamer and Confucius would remind us our future is in the past, as is reverberating with the curriculum theorist William Piner. So while it is essential to balance tradition with innovation, recognizing the importance of tradition in pedagogy helps to create a more holistic and well-rounded educational experience, incorporating the wisdom of past into the dynamic process of learning and growth. So methods against methods. So hermeneutic understanding refuses to anchor on a very safe and strictly confined methodological harbor, and especially sets itself against natural scientific methods and does not follow a set of predetermined procedures. So Gadamer claims, quote unquote, I was not trying to ensure that the concept of method had the widest possible scope of application. On the contrary, what I hoped to show was the concept of method was not an appropriate way of achieving legitimation in humanities and social sciences. So hermeneutic methods, drawing on David Jardin's word, has no face, no body, no memories, no stars, no blood, no images, no ancestors, no ghosts, no spirit, no monsters, no familiars. So this is a method. It's very in a messy to and fro movement. It's constantly in a dynamic, and like Gadamer does not trust the Enlightenment agenda, which strives to master the scientific methodology, achieve valid evidence, and therefore eliminate prejudice in experiment. So Gadamer describes it as prejudice against prejudices. So the to and fro structure of hermeneutic understanding highlights imagination rather than prescribed methods, aiming at controlling or managing. So imagination denies the temptation to draw a conclusion and keeps the structure of hermeneutic understanding as open as possible. So Gadamer suggests that the confined horizons and prejudices could not be eliminated or avoided, but to be challenged and transformed in the structure of a question. So he put a lot of emphasis on question. So he said the answers of question opens up possibilities and keeps them open. So a hermeneutic question does not aim to find a definite answer, but it violates the taken for granted and disturbs the original prejudices and creates a space for imaginations to join the to and fro movement. So prejudices and prejudgments are kept open and being cultivated in the processes of imagining and questioning. So which further structure for possibilities for better understanding. So for Confucius, so the interpretive approaches in Confucian understanding evolve, as I just discussed, with the long history and change dramatically over its long history. So for classical Confucianism, there are also no fixated methods or methodology to follow in terms of understanding. Confucius integrates the seemingly very contrasting approaches of restatement and imagination, imitation, and creation. So he seems to break through that binary and to have the ambition to transcend the limitations of linguistics and its structures and understand the imaginations to reach the ultimate ontological Tao, as shown here, from the language. So he wants to transcend to the wordless Tao, the ontological Tao, which can go beyond language. So as Lin Wu captures, the interpretation is to deconstruct language and set free its meanings, which could be compared to a seed which drops into the earth and then springs out new shoots. So new interpretation will grow anew as a living creature. I understand the liveliness of Confucius' understanding lies in its attempt to break away the confinement of language and structures and then reach the next level of creativity and intentions of heart, finally unify with the ultimate Tao. Unlike Gadamer's hermeneutic understanding that lies in the to and fro structure to open up the participants' previous horizons, Confucius' understanding tends to enact transcendence from understanding literal meaning of a text to the wordless Tao beyond language. So the Gadamerian to and fro structure in the Confucian transcending structure of understanding, which involves moving from literal meaning to Tao, have interesting implications for teaching. So the to and fro structure, it emphasizes on a dialectical or dialogical movement between the interpreter and the text, the self and the other. So the dialectical understanding can be applied to teaching by fostering a dynamic interaction between teachers and students. It encourages a continuous dialogue, ongoing dialogue, where both parties contribute to a construction of meaning. Teachers adopting a Gadamerian perspective can create an open and inclusive classroom environment, recognizing that interpretation is a collaborative process. And teachers, educators, can encourage the students to express their perspectives, fostering a rich exchange of ideas and interpretations. And for Confucius, and if we think of Confucius' transcending structure, which moves from literal meaning to Tao, the Tao actually represents a deeper and more profound understanding. So in teaching, this approach may suggest that educators should guide students beyond surface level comprehension. Teachers can encourage learners to explore holistic praxis and even the unspeakable and unseenable. So Confucian teaching involves the cultivation of wisdom, a deeper and reflective understanding which can go beyond the factual knowledge. So understanding for truth. So I believe hermeneutic truth should be distinguished from Plato's metaphysical truth or Enlightenment scientific truth. So the truth in Gadamer's hermeneutic inquiry is not an essentialist or existentialist truth, existential truth. It is an existential truth. It is not an infinite, but a finite and fallible truth. So hermeneutic understanding as a co-creative process is not primarily about uncovering the absolute truth with a capitalized T about the object. Rather, it is about understanding the multiplicity of truth with a small t, emergent in relational and transforming dialogic space between the self and the other. So the notion of truth for Confucius, what is the notion of truth for Confucius? Actually, it's the embodied truth and closely related to morality and ethics instead of being confined with logical development. So for Confucius, truth should be and must be embodied through human life. Confucian truths are explicitly and primarily concerned with moral truths, which are deeply embedded in human relationships, which I believe could be compared with Gadamer's association of phronesis or hermeneutics to ethical knowing. So following Gadamer and Confucius, when teachers teach, we not only ask questions for students to master the knowledge, but to encourage discussions about what is most worthwhile knowledge, knowledge structured by ethics. in the teaching context, this implies that learning is not a one-sided process where the teacher imparts a single or absolute truth. Instead, it involves a dynamic dialogue where students contribute to the construction of meaning as well, recognizing that multiple interpretations are possible. So teaching in this framework involves acknowledging and respecting diverse and different horizons among our students and teachers. So it recognizes that different individuals bring unique perspectives and there is no singular truth that applies universally. So Confucian interpretation encourages ethical considerations in teaching. So when teaching, teachers teach for multiple truths. Educators can guide their students in considering the ethical implications of different perspectives and fostering a sense of responsibility and ethical awareness. So last but not least, I hope to talk about the unification between understanding and acting. So application is an element of understanding itself, quoting Gadamer here. Understanding for Gadamer does not belong to the theoretical realm. It encompasses application in the ground of practice as its inseparable part. So Gadamer's application could not be understood as relating some pre-given universals to the particular situation. I believe hermeneutic and application is oriented towards action that manifests itself in the process of attunement to the particular situation. So also, hermeneutic application is not top-down, top-down application. Hermeneutic application is not downward, or like which involves implementing universal rule to particulars, or outward bound, which requires setting the standard to measure and evaluate. So rather, hermeneutic application, which resides in the hermeneutic cycle, is in the to and fro process. Gadamer has no intention to transcend the embeddedness in the contingent and unpredictable life. So rather, hermeneutic wisdom is nourished in the dialogic mutual process of application. So Confucius is also concerned with the integrity of understanding and acting. Confucius points out that the understanding must be practiced and acted out. So when Zigong inquires about a gentleman, what is a gentleman? So the master replies, his actions go first of his words. So Confucian ethics is primarily concerned of transforming people towards morally good human beings who can act well in the world. Of course, New Confucian Wang Yangming claims understanding and acting forms a unity, 知行合一. So pedagogy, in Gadamerian sense, should encourage students to actively apply what they learn in real-life situations. This application of knowledge through action deepens understanding and facilitates integration of learning into one's lived experiences. Action is inherent in its circular to and fro hermeneutic cycles. As learners actively interpret and reinterpret both individual components and the entire situation, they will contribute to a dynamic involving understanding. And Confucius himself emphasized the importance of exemplary teacher who not only imparts knowledge, but also embodies virtue through actions. So in Confucian pedagogy, teachers serve as role models, demonstrating ethical behavior and ethical and moral principles through their actions. Students learn not only from what is taught, but from what is lived. So I hope to conclude my presentation by saying Gadamerian and Confucian approach to understanding inform teachers pedagogically. So I hope to, through dialoguing with them, provoke questions rather than resolve conflicts, disturb scientific rationale underlying teaching today. And in light of Gadamerian hermeneutics and Confucian interpretation, I really hope to draw teachers' attention to the historical awareness in our teaching, the humility about our methods, the respectfulness for multiple truths, and the cultivation of agentic action in our lived educational moment. So I do not intend to transcend the rough ground, quoting Joseph Dan, of our experiences through an enchanted methodology path, but on the contrary, I'm standing firmly on the ground, kneeling down against the ground, pressing my ear on the ground. The ground, I believe it is the lived experience of teaching. So I will end my talk with Marcus' comment. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. So I believe it is true with understanding as well. So thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Ying. Thank you, Ying. Like it's thank you for an insightful presentation. Like I was looking forward to learn. And I think now we're ready for, we can open the floor for questions. You can raise a virtual hand to ask a question, or you can type in the question in the chat. Okay, Fatima.
Hi, Ying. So first of all, I wanted to say thank you very much. Such a great presentation. I really enjoyed and started thinking a lot more about these great concepts. So thank you for putting it out there. And what I wanted to mention, maybe it's more of a reflection rather than a question, and a reflection for myself, but to share here from what I was understanding from the multiple truths that you were mentioning from a Confucius perspective, which was really interesting to me. I found some, relation similarities with maybe post-structural perspectives or post-humanistic perspectives on relational ontology, and even maybe also the multi-eyed or double-eyed seeing rooted in indigenous perspectives. So it was really interesting for me to see how all of these come together with understanding of multiple truths and how it could be brought into the classroom. So again, it's not a question, but it really got me thinking about the connections of all these perspectives.
Thank you, Fatima.
Thank you very much, Fatima, for the comment. For Gadamer is like his very famous book, Truth and Method, but actually he is against method in terms of the very preset method, and he is against truth as well in terms of the capitalized T, truth. So it's very interesting that you find this resonating with your work as well. And indeed, the multiplicity and plurality of truth in today's world is especially important. And the communication sometimes, when we communicate, we aspire for a common ground, but actually we need to invite the difference to flourish in our conversations as well. So thank you very much for the comment, Fatima, and for coming.
Thank you, Fatima. Any other questions or comments or reflections? Okay, I have a question. Oh, okay, Fabrizio, please go ahead.
You can go ahead because you prepared the questions in advance, so I'm sure your questions are much more.
No, we'll go for Fabrizio, then Melinda. Please go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Zahia. No, I was thinking how well, first of all, thanks, Ying. It was really good to hear from you. While I was hearing you, I was relating your presentation to the work I've been doing with teaching and learning commons about the importance of us incorporating undergraduate research in our teaching. Because you were telling us the importance of the understanding, right? And so the literature on undergraduate research highlights how the involvement, the active participation of students in research helps them be active learners, be active producers of knowledge, producers of this process of understanding. So I was wondering if you could explore more this connection between the method of undergraduate research with your presentation. And the other comment I wanted to make is another question for you. I love the idea of multiple truths because I also agree that we should be humble in our methods, humble in the way we teach. We are not the owners of the truth. My question is about the issue around different levels of power among the people who hold different truths. For example, the truth held by certain groups will have more power and can be harmful to other groups, right? So I love that you also brought up the idea of ethics, the importance of ethics. So I wonder if you believe that exploring the idea of ethics is a good way to deal with this challenge of different levels of power among different truths. Thanks.
Thank you, Fabrizio, for your wonderful questions. And for your first question about the undergraduate involvement and doing research, I definitely believe that Gadamerian Hermeneutics and Confucian interpretation, they both have their own, insights to that, because for Gadamer, to and fro, as I said, like the process of the to and fro is especially important for people to gain a better understanding. So as teachers, as people like who are in power, like drawing on to your second question. So, the to and fro dynamic is like in a way to like, although Gadamer actually did not a very good job in addressing the power dynamics, but I do believe the to and fro dynamic really speaks to it because it's more fluid and the dynamic shows more possibilities rather than a fixated, very hierarchical structure. So although I don't think Gadamer did a very good job in addressing the power dynamics, but his to and fro dynamics already speaks to it. So, and I do think this is the dialogic way of understanding and could speak to the research active involvement of students, because when we view the students as researchers, as people who have a lot of things to contribute, so we can really enter the circle rather than the using them, imparting knowledge to them is like Paulo Ferrari's work of deposit, the banking concept of education. So it's more towards a problem posing concept of education. It's by asking questions to open up possibilities to renew our understandings. So this is maybe this is not a answer, but it's a further comment following your comment. And for the second one, I think just now I mentioned about Gadamer and Confucius. I don't think they did a good job in addressing the power dynamics and inequalities. And definitely, I think the structure itself could be a way to deconstruct the very hierarchical structure, but it's not good enough. As you said, some people with truth, but they have more power. So do they mean their truth is more legitimate than other groups? So I think critical pedagogy, like Paulo Ferrari's work, they kind of reverse it and saying people with the pedagogy of the oppressed and the people who are oppressed and marginalized, and we need to listen to them. So they are more advocating for those groups of people. But still, even the critical pedagogy has its own critique as well, because like Gerd Bista wrote an article criticizing critical pedagogy, and he says, who's ideas are legitimate or like better does not depend on the identities they hold. So I really believe there is a lot of tension in that conversation. And as I said, but ongoing conversation, ongoing dialogue is very, very important to us to, you know, to acknowledge the multiplicity of truth. So, yeah, thank you very much. This is a very, very great question.
Thank you.
Thank you, Fabrizio. Melinda?
I didn't have a question. I just wanted to say that, Ying, you're very captivating, and I really enjoyed this talk. I've been in and out listening, but I'm really grateful to be able to learn from you and your approaches, and what a great role model you are to your students. And I love the space that you support and provide and hold for them to be empowered and engaged. They're so lucky to have you, and KPU's lucky to have you on their team.
So much, Melinda. You are very kind.
Yeah, it was beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Melinda. Thank you, Dan.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really enjoyed your presentation. I just had a question, something I was curious about. In your discussion about Confucian interpretation, you say that teachers should be role models. They should demonstrate ethical behavior in their teaching. And part of learning is about sort of observing the how something is taught rather than what it is taught. But I was wondering, can we derive from Gadamerian or Confucius any insights into what types of ethical behavior teachers should be attempting to embody?
Okay, this is a great question. And I think yes and no. Yes, in terms of for, you know, Gadamer, he's I believe he, you know, follows a lot of Aristotelian tradition, and he talks about ethical knowing in terms of the phronesis, which is a practical wisdom, and in terms of the Aristotelian traditions, they do have different virtues, like intellectual virtues, moral virtues. They have categories, and for Confucius as well, they have categories of virtues like 仁, 义, 礼, 智, 信. So it's like benevolence, justice, and you know, appropriateness. So they have different sets of virtues. But the reason why I say no is I believe the most important thing for them is to attune to that moment, to be attuned to that particularity of that moment, in particular with a particular person in that particular context, and to understand what the virtue means. So if you define a virtue, such as, for example, when I went to my, I still remember the days that I went to do the morning reading for my son as the school, and there broadcast, you know, there will be broadcast saying, today we will learn compassion, and another day we will learn like empathy. So it seems that it's well defined, and but it's not true for Gadamer and Confucius, as I understand. For them, it's always embedded in the lived experience that we try to figure out what it means to us in that moment with that person. So it's always you know, a process of knowing better, but do not close to models and you know, templates and for people to get. So yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dan. Thank you for coming.
Any other questions? Okay, I have a question for you. You're talking about multiple truths, right? And this dialogue in the classroom. So I'm thinking about this time and age that we live in. How can a teacher open up when there are so many difficult topics? afraid to handle and to open up to in a classroom? Like, how can we apply what, like the two approaches that you are actually? Can you hear me?
I can hear you in and out. Just
Oh, okay, all right. I think they're my AirPods. No, I'm just talking about encouraging multiple truths and having this open dialogue in the classroom. How can teachers do this today? So many difficult topics.
Oh, so Zaya, I'm hearing in and out. I'm thinking your question is about the multiple truth and how teachers can address them in difficult moments.
Yes, like how can, yes, with encouraging multiple truth and open up the dialogue in the classrooms. With today's time and age, and there are so many difficult topics that how can teacher handle difficult topics? Like if you want to open up, but you cannot sometimes talk about certain things and how to talk about things. Like I want to hear from you, like, what do you think teachers can do? How can we support teachers to talk about difficult topics in the classrooms? Like, you know?
Yeah, this is a very good question. I often think of this myself as well, because yeah, this is, for me, I think, first of all, between me and my students, I hope to create, environment for welcoming the differences and to be respectful. So I think the dynamics in the classroom needs to be, enacted, or we enact that moment, right? So as teachers, we all know that whether we have this trust in that classroom. So maybe that's before we go into any difficult topics, trust and mutual understanding and a welcoming environment, and a welcoming environment for differences is very important. And another thing, I think, for me, I would like to approach difficult questions with more questions, with continued questions. So rather than drawing a conclusion, I often ask my students questions, and after they reply, I continue with other questions. And, so I really believe that a good question worth more than a good answer. So continued questions could help our students to open up some space. They don't, they didn't open up before.
Thank you, Ying. Thank you so much. Okay, I think this is the end of our talk. Thank you all for coming today. And Ying, thank you for like I'm sure like everybody that attended the talk today would share the same feelings. Holly, do you have a question for Ying?
Sorry, I accidentally hit the wrong button.
It's okay.
No problem.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you so very much
Bye.
for joining today's talk, and thank you, Zaya, for hosting it. Thank you. Bye, Erin. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Yeah.
So much.
Bye, everyone.